I've got a couple red potatoes left over from when I planted in the greenhouse in the Mittleider grow boxes. And so I wanted to show you what I would do if I was living in a rental or a house where I could not have a greenhouse and I could not have permission to build a grow box on the back patio with a south-facing direction. So the first option I would do is, if I had property that I could not grow on, I would see if I could put a grow box on a patio that faces south. You can do that very quickly and easily. You just need some 2x8s. Follow the instructions in the Mittleider Gardening Course book, which you can buy at ldsprepperstore.com. Set that up on the back patio, fill it with sand and sawdust, or just potting soil, which we'll show you here in a minute, and then plant my garden. If I could not do that, that being my first option, I would grow in some buckets. Now here I've got some 5-gallon buckets that I have actually fertilizer in, and then I have some buckets left over from trees that we purchased. These black buckets you can find basically all over any nursery, and just ask them for the buckets. They'll probably just give them to you because they just have to throw them out. So the 5-gallon, these black buckets are actually 6 gallons, and I've measured out how much sand and sawdust mixture I need to fill those containers. So now what I need to do is I'm going to add my Mittleider weekly feed and my Mittleider pre-plant fertilizer to the soil mix at the rate of 2 ounces of pre-plant mix per 5-gallon bucket and 1 ounce of weekly feed per 5-gallon bucket. And then I will feed on a weekly basis the 1 ounce of weekly feed each week until it's time to stop fertilizing. So I have these 2 potatoes. They're almost exact twins of each other, and you can see they've got some sprouts growing here. So I'm going to take these potatoes, I'm going to do a little experiment. So let's go and get started. I've got my scale here. I know that I'm going to need 2 ounces of weekly feed for this amount of soil. That's 1. And there's 2 ounces. And I'll mix that in here. Now I'm going to take my pre-plant mix and put in 4 ounces. Make sure that this is zeroed out first. There's my 4 ounces. And now I'm just going to mix it into the soil. I'm going to take my first container and put my soil in it. This is straight sand and sawdust. It's very inexpensive. It's nice and clean. I've got videos on how to make this. It's nice and light and airy. Just great medium to grow in. So I'm going to see if I can't get the same amount of soil in both containers. Now if I didn't have these black containers and I was going to use a 5-gallon bucket, I would just take a drill and just drill several holes on the bottom. You can see that these have holes on the sides, and just use them instead of these buckets. I now have an equal amount of soil in each of these containers. I'm just going to take one here and plant it so the top of it is 1.5 inches below the surface. There we go. And then I'm going to go 5 inches deep on this one, making sure that I have all these up here on the top. All right, that's nice and deep. I'll now just water them, and I'm just going to set them out right here, just like if this were my patio. I actually do have a chitted potato here, and you can see this is great, ready to plant here. And so I thought I'd do another experiment, and I'm going to use potting soil. These are 2 different bags of potting soil. And I'm going to show you the difference because potting soil is not all equal. This bag right here has the same amount of potting soil as this one. I don't know the cost of these. My wife purchased both of these. And this one has no ingredients on it. There's nothing other than saying it's potting soil. This one over here does have ingredients on it. It says that it is a blend of aged fir bark, Canadian sphagnum peat moss, compost, horticultural grade perlite, and fertilizer. Now when I look at the fertilizer, it says nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. The nitrogen is 0.16, the phosphorus is 0.1, and the potassium is 0.07. So hardly any fertilizer in there at all. So I'm going to mix in some Mittleider weekly feed into this container. But if I were buying Miracle-Gro potting soil and it had substantially more fertilizer in it, I would absolutely not add any fertilizer to it. But since this appears to be all organic fertilizer, then I'm going to go ahead and add some more Mittleider weekly feed to it. So let's take a look at the difference in the potting soil. This potting soil here is much heavier. In other words, there's a lot more dirt in this potting soil. I can push it together and it clumps up. Now I can see there's some twigs and some other things in here. It's dark. I don't know what's making it dark. And this one here is the perlite and it's much lighter. This is more like the sand and sawdust that I mix. You can put perlite in the sand and sawdust mix if you like. I just prefer not to. But this looks like a much better quality potting soil. So I would use the lightest potting soil mix that you can get. So there was just enough potting mix in there to put the same amount of soil in this container as the other two. So that's great. I'll go ahead and add my 2 ounces of pre-plant and my 1 ounce of weekly feed to this. So I've got my chitted potato here. Just for comparison, let's see if we can put this 3 inches down from the top and see how that does. All right, those are all planted. I will now just water them in, make sure the soil is nice and wet, and this will be my patio potatoes, and we'll give you updates during the season and of course at the harvest to let you know which one produces the most and which method seems to work the best. So whether you have throwaway tree containers or 5-gallon buckets, whatever you need to do to plant food, do it. I also have an entire series on how to build 5-gallon bucket self-watering gardens. Very cheap, very easy to maintain because they literally self-water. So I'll have a link below this video on the self-watering 5-gallon garden. Okay, after all that work, I looked at the buckets and I thought, we can put more soil in there. So I put more soil in it, and I decided to change up the experiment a little bit. So thanks for coming all the way to the end of this video. I decided to take the full unchitted potatoes and plant them in the left and center buckets because those are full-size potatoes. I'm going to compare to see if we get a higher yield with the sand and sawdust versus the store-bought potting soil. So we have the same size potatoes in the same size containers, same amount of fertilizer. The soil is the difference. I'm guessing that we'll get more yield out of the sand and sawdust because it's lighter and will allow the potatoes to grow more tubers. The bucket on the right is the chitted potato, and I'm going to plant that to see how well that grows, and I'm going to plant everything 5 inches deep. So the only difference is going to be the soil in the center bucket, and we have the chitted potato on the right bucket. This will be interesting. This is LDS Prepper reminding you, if you are prepared, you shall not fear. A great way to prepare is to grow your own food, and especially high nutrition food and high yield food per square foot, and potatoes are a great way to go.